Shalom, and welcome back to our Torah portion this week, Lech Lecha. We finished with leaving Avraham in Egypt after he had received his call from the Lord and all those discussions that we had gone through. And we'd concentrated on the text, Lech Lecha. What does that actually mean? Go to yourself. That in this journey that Avraham is about to walk, which is not going to be easy. It is going to be fraught with all kinds of challenges and difficulties, blessings, and some unfortunate encounters. Along the way, he's going to discover who he is. And Abraham didn't quite start so well with his call. He, instead of leaving his father's house, he didn't until Terah had died. Instead of leaving the family, he took Lot with him, which is not going to work out well. And then he'd gone into Egypt because of a famine and then had lied. But God has begun the redemptive process. He has restored his wife back to him, and a lot of other things are now going to be restored. So the next words you hear in the Torah portion, because we're picking this up at chapter 13, Avram, that is still his name, it says, then Avram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the south. So in Hebrew, it says, Ve'ya'al Avraham memitzrayim. So, and up went Abraham from Egypt. And the verb that's used is la'alot, which means to ascend, where you often heard of the term aliyah, to go up. Whenever a Jewish person goes out to read the Torah, from the Bima, he is making aliyah. He stands up to read, which is something that you actually also see in the Gospels. You stand up to read the Bible and you sit down to teach, which is what you see Jesus doing in the Gospel of Luke. But so the word ya'al, to go up, has both a physical connotation, because he leaves Egypt and goes up, even though it's the south of Canaan, that's still up from Egypt in terms of its geography. Where it is on the map. It's also spiritually. He's now going up spiritually. He has left Egypt and he has gone to the Holy Land. So anytime you see in the Bible, you'll like for Samson, he'll go up to Jerusalem. So he's spiritually doing well, but then he'll go down to the Philistines where he spiritually doesn't do so well and ends up falling in love with Delilah, which only causes him all kinds of problems. So there's a spiritual component as well. God is beginning to restore all things, and that includes perhaps a relationship that he's going to have with Lot, although it doesn't work out so well. Lot has been with him in Egypt, and he has now become quite rich in Egypt. He has done economically well. In verse 2 of 13, it says, Avram was very rich now in livestock, in silver and gold. And this is the first image that you have of shepherds. Shepherds in the ancient world were of high standing. They were the lords, they were the rulers and the kings of the day. They owned livestock, they owned property, they had servants, they could actually field small armies, and they were they had the characteristic of being able to guide. So they would not only care for animals and humans, but they would also care spiritually for their community. So the faith of the father figure was the faith of the tribe. And you're going to see that when we come into the circumcision, because the entire community is going to get circumcised. There is no objection to this. This is what Abraham's God is my God. And if I don't like Abraham's God, then I don't like Abraham. And so therefore I will leave. So anybody who's associated with Abraham, and that includes Ishmael, will understand that they're listening to the God of Abraham. So in the first temple period, the shepherds have a very good characteristic. They are something that you aspire to be, a really good shepherd. And the first kings, all the rulers and great heroes of Israel were all shepherds. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way through to David, who's a shepherd. The first king who's not a shepherd in the Bible is Solomon. And we know what happens to him. He is a city dweller who doesn't do so well. And though while he starts really well, his end is not so good. And shepherds once the society had urbanized and the shepherds had moved in from the country into the urban areas, then their wealth was transferred to the town. And they would live in villas and things like that. Who would they get to look after their flocks, which would stay outside the town? Then you would get hirelings. And so by the time you get to the Second Temple period and the New Testament, shepherds are the lower class of the family, and they're not the higher class, but they still carry this idea of a really good leader is a shepherd. And while we've had bad shepherds, Ezekiel 34 talks about bad shepherds, it's God is going to eventually give us a good shepherd. He himself will come and be the good shepherd, which is John 10. So here, Avram still, he is a good shepherd. He's beginning to get restored in all things, including now he is wealthy. And when he comes up into the Holy Land, he goes to a place where he's built an altar. And altars are not something that we should find strange. Sometimes we come in our Christian tradition, we have a reticence about holy objects inside some of our churches, or the altar is not a very high focus. But it certainly was a high focus for the heroes of God. The way that they adored the Lord, the way that they got close to the Lord. Now, notice Abraham can speak to God. God can talk to Abraham. So it's not that he needs to build an altar to do this. But he does. And he enjoys going to places where there are altars. Noah builds an altar when he first gets off the ark. He's had God inside the ark all the time. Now, why all of a sudden do you have to build an altar? There's something about that, that object. And we should not disparage it when we first see it. In fact, sometimes it is a good thing to go and stand around an altar to the Lord and to worship him. Lot goes with Avram out of Egypt. He has also experienced life in Egypt. He also has become wealthy and a successful farmer. But now the sheer blessings which they have received causes competition. And so they start to argue, and the family begins to have trouble. God had told Avram, leave your family, but he didn't. He took him. Maybe it was because Avram and Sarah were barren and Lot was going to be the inheritor. But here you have there's tension between the shepherds of Avram and Lot, and they argue, and so we get the division of the territory. Lot goes and takes what he thinks is the best, and Avram doesn't. So in verse 13, it says, the men of Sodom, which is where Lot ends up, were exceedingly wicked, and they were sinful against the Lord. Now this sets up an interesting theological question. So here you have a city that is engaged in wickedness. We're not 100% sure what it is. Initially, they're just called the evil ones, the Ra'im. There's some sort of wickedness and a sin, and it's a sin against the Lord. But do they know the Lord? If they don't know the Lord, how can it possibly be a sin? Like, this would be akin to looking at the world today and saying, atheistic Mongolia is obviously sinning against the Lord because they don't believe in God, and so therefore they deserve divine retribution. Perhaps we need to think back that at the time of Abraham, the knowledge of God was still somewhere latent inside the earth, that Noah coming off the ark, the children that then dispersed, the people that built Babel had not lost the idea that there was a divine being. And while they had their own gods and had their own traditions, they still had a sense that there might be actually something bigger and higher. And so there's often some commonalities that you find in ancient pantheons. There's sort of like the ruling god, the clash between a god and a good god and a bad god, of darkness and light, etc., etc. Flood stories and all those kinds of commonalities. Here, whoever Sodom was, their sins were against the Lord. And but how would they know what that was if they hadn't had any latent knowledge of him? For some reason, Lot chooses to go and stay there. We don't know the reason why, other than it's a good-looking land. So in verse 14, God speaks again. Doesn't say where, doesn't say what Avram's doing. All we know is that Lot had departed from him. So now Avram is alone. And the Lord now takes some time to communicate. He didn't communicate to Avram in Egypt. That the text it tells us. It doesn't, we don't know of conversations that the Lord had with Lot or Avram as they're journeying towards the Holy Land or to the land of Canaan. But the Lord now says, lift up your eyes. This is in verse 14 of chapter 13. Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are. Look north, southward, eastward, westward. For all the land which you see, I give you and your descendants forever. So you have a divine promise. The promise of God to Abraham and his descendants is everlasting, and the promise is land. Now, this causes all kinds of problems in our modern day politics. It really does. But whatever you say about the Bible, you still have to wrestle with these texts. And these texts give a promise to the descendants of Abraham, not to Lot, not to other people. However, remember, one of the descendants of Abraham is also Ishmael. So all kinds of issues with that too. But look what Avram has to do. Look north, south, east, west. All the land you see, I give. Small problem, can't see much. Anyone who's actually been to the Holy Land and actually sat on a hill in the desert and looked north, south, east, west suddenly discovers that if you're actually down in the south in the Negev, you actually can't see the Golan or the Galilee. It's a bit of a strange one, right? And if you're looking across, you can see the mountains of Jordan, but you can't see beyond. And if you turn westward, you actually can't see the Mediterranean. So how far is this actually being? So we have to be careful when drawing borders, okay? Because now, literally, we are talking about land. Its boundaries are unclear. Also a problem. But not the fact that Avram have received a blessing from the Lord. In verse 16, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. This is God giving a lot of promises to Abraham. And Abraham isn't required to do anything. So far, the Lord has just been talking to Avram and has been telling him, I'm going to be doing this for you. There hasn't been a response yet. I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth. And then your descendants also could be numbered. So there is this idea that the descendants of Abraham will be fruitful. And this is biological. So still, the number of Gentiles outnumbers the numbers of Jewish people, and probably always will, just because there's a lot of them. Remember, God chooses the smallest of the nations to be his people. Yet here, there is this promise that the descendants of Abraham will be as the dust of the earth. So there's something else behind the literal text, sort of implying that his descendants, remember in chapter 12, the blessing is going to go through all of the earth somehow. And we know that as everyone who is a follower of the Lord and a lover of the Messiah is a son of Abraham. So God says, arise, walk in the land, its length and breadth, for I'll give it to you. And this actually begins the Jewish sage understanding. Which parts of the land are we actually allowed to have? And we're allowed to have that which we can walk on. I can't have that which I don't walk on. So if you don't live in a certain city because other people live in that city is not yours. So you can say, but God gave it to me. Have you walked there? If you haven't walked there, then it's not. There is a partnership that you actually see in the blessings of the Lord. There's actually a partnership that you see running through the whole Bible ever since God made the garden and put a man in it and said, I made the garden, now you care for it. I made all the animals, but you name them. I have created the earth, you subdue it. You work it. Jesus, I am the resurrection, you proclaim it. Okay, you go out and share the good news of the gospel. So there is this idea of a partnership. And so God says, I will bless you, Avram, but you need to walk it, you and your descendants. And so he does. He starts moving around and he finds a place that he likes. He goes to the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And so who's Mamre, we ask? Well, we're actually going to discover who he is in the next couple of chapters. But here, he goes to a place called Hebron. And Hebron is a nice play on words because Abraham was called a friend of God. And friend in Hebrew is chaver. And if you are a friend, you are a chaveran. And that's the same word as Hebron with just different vowels. And so Hebron is named after the friend of God, which is Abraham, and still recorded as Hebron in both Arabic and in Hebrew. And he also builds an altar there because this is his way of connecting to the Lord. He just spoke to the Lord, okay, and then he moves and he finds a place that he likes. And then his connection to God is not to sit under a tree and just talk. It's also to construct and create this this altar, this mizbeach in Hebrew. All right. So as he walks through the land, he also has to connect with it. It said the Jewish people and the land. Israel is two things. Israel is a land, and it is also a people. And Israel connects with itself. The Jewish people connect with the land, and often when Israel is back in the land, it flourishes. There's more trees in the land. There's more average rainfall. It continues to produce more food. They're fighting back the desert. There is this strong connection between the people and the land. And you see it right here in the beginning of Genesis, where God is asking Abraham, walk the land. Again, play on the parasha, lech, walk to yourself, figure out and learn who you are. Things go wrong with our hero Lot now, and it starts off in chapter 14. Came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar. Now, in the ancient world, you didn't read the Bible, you heard it. So as you're hearing somebody talk about the next big story, now we're going to be talking about Lot, you hear the word, the king Amraphel. Well, who's he? Doesn't matter, but we know of the place, king of Shinar. When you hear the word Shinar, you think of one thing. What is it, I hear you ask? Babylon, Babel. The Tower of Babel was on the plains of Shinar. The plains of Shinar are in modern day Iraq, but ancient Babylon. And so this now has a connection with the Tower of Babel, and who's one of the ancient heroes who helped construct it, or is considered to help construct? Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is in Jewish tradition, is a long-lived villain. In the ancient world, you can see in Genesis that the heroes are long-lived, and then after the flood, they start to drop off. So, but Nimrod is one of these long-lived villains, and in Jewish exegetical tradition, he's also an antagonist of Abraham. And so in the Ur of the Chaldees, while he's there, he encounters Nimrod according to ancient sources. No need to discuss them today, but if you were Jewish and you were hearing the words Shinar, you're thinking very bad. You're thinking rebellion against the Lord. You're thinking tower. You're thinking multiple languages and all the things that are negative. So the next part of the story is definitely going to go south, going to go bad. There's an alignment of evil kings, Amraphel, Arioch, and Kedorlaomer. And Tidal, king of the nations, whoever they are. Now they make war, these four kings, against other kings: Bera of Sodom, Birsha of Gomorrah, Shin-Av, king of Admah, Shemabah, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zorah. So it's 4 against 5. These join together at the valley of Siddim, which is present-day Yam HaMelech, or the Salt Sea, what we call the Dead Sea. Today, this is an area that is very dry and arid, but back then it seems to have been topologically different. And you actually have archaeological evidence of harvesting fields of wheat in the past. You've found all those seed kernels and such like, and they engage in international battle. And Kadorlaomer wins. He goes and starts a little rampage around that area, and he ends up defeating the alliance against him, and captures a variety of areas, including Sodom, where Lot is being kept. Now Lot is now in trouble, and this sets up the next part of the story when we get to verse 13. Someone who had escaped, okay, comes and tells Avram, the Ivri, the Hebrew. This is the first time that the word Hebrew is mentioned. Okay, Avram is living inside Canaan, and he now has identity. Right, he's becoming to be restored to himself. He's finding out who he is on this journey. He is of the Ivri. He is a Hebrew. He is beginning to create an identity. People are beginning to call him that too. Ivri, the shoresh, the root of it is avar, which means one who crossed over. La'avor means to cross over. You cross the road, you use that verb. You cross out things on pages. It's the thing to cross over something. So Hebrew, the literal word for Hebrew, is the one who crossed over. And it was Abraham or Avram. Now he's dwelling, now it clarifies where he is. He's by the terebinth trees, or the oak trees, of Mamre, the Amorite. Mamre ha'Amori. So Mamre isn't a place, it's a person. And so Mamre has a brother who is called Eshkol, and another brother, Aner. And these are allies, or in Hebrew, Ba'alei Brit, people of the covenant. So these are non-Jews who are deep friends of Avram. And so why would Avram, who initially started his career as a non-Jew, is now identified as a Hebrew, engaging with these three people? They are his friends and his allies. So he's been sitting, and the Jewish commentaries will say that these are actually all now Torah scholars. They're actually discussing God and coming up with some really good ideas of how you pray and build altars and biblical discussions and such like that. So even amongst the non-Jews, they haven't all gone bad. They're allies. You can and should, as Jewish people, make friends with non-Jews. Your hero, or the father of the faith, Abraham, clearly did so. So he's sitting under some oak trees with his friend Mamre, and news comes that Lot is taken. But notice what the word used in verse 14. Now I'm reading from a New King James. It says, "Now when Avram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his house, and he went into pursuit as far as Dan." So a couple of things there. One, why does he call Lot, who's actually his nephew, Ach, brother? Because we've used that word to describe the people that he's sitting with. So there's Mamre, Ach Eshkol, the brother of Eshkol, Ach Aner, the brother of Aner. And then Avram is told, your Ach is captured, your brother. Not his brother, it's not his Ach, it's his Achyan, his nephew. But here, the connection is quite close. The text is making you think. You're sitting there hearing and you're going, no, wait, Rabbi, you should read that again. It doesn't say it should say nephew, right? So you're looking at a connection. They've had a problem. They've had a fallout. They cannot coexist together. They did in Egypt, but they couldn't when they're successful. Success often does that, by the way. It splits people apart, and they had to separate. But God turns around, I guess, maybe through this servant, whoever this nameless person, and says, "Your brother is in trouble," and that quickens Avram, and he's going to go and help. He immediately gets his soldiers together, and he's got 318. That doesn't seem like a lot, does it? But Gideon could also do a lot with a small army. And here we see that he pursues these forces that had captured his nephew, his brother, Lot, as far as Dan. Well, that's a small problem in terms of literalness, because in the effect that Dan hasn't been born yet. So that territory actually has not been assigned. Plus, which Dan? So Dan is one of the children of Jacob, who is yet to be born. There was no way that that territory was called Dan at the time. This is a scribal interpolation. Somebody, as they're transmitting the Bible, has come along and gone, oh, we don't know what the name of this place is. Anyone know what it's called? Oh, it's today called Dan. No problem. And put in the corrective for us. But which one? Biblical Dan was supposed to be where Tel Aviv is. That was the territory that Dan was supposed to have, but he didn't capture it. He failed during the invasion in Joshua, and he ended up moving north into what present-day Golan. Is that where Avram went? We don't know. Point is, Avram goes to rescue his family. That's a good thing. This is one of those patterns of the Redeemer, of the kinsman Redeemer, that he goes to go and set the captives free. And he attacks and apparently fights them as far north as Damascus. So this battle goes a long way, and probably took up some time. It wasn't an overnight thing. And he captures a lot of stuff, and he succeeds. And he brings back Lot. And then, as he is returning, well, he's going to see the king of Sodom, who had lost his battle at Kedorlaomer. And he's got a lot of gear, and he's going to meet the king of Sodom. And in verse 17, it says, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh. And then immediately we are introduced to another character, which we have never seen before, Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a character that just suddenly appears out of the blue. And in verse 18, he says, Melchizedek, king of Shalem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High, or in Hebrew, El Elyon, a word that we have not heard God called before. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Avram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And he gave him a tithe. Verse 21, now the king of Sodom said to Avram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. Think about what you've just heard. Let's take out verses 18, 19, 20, okay, 3 short verses, and let's read 17 and 21 without the little incident with Melchizedek, and we'll discover it reads properly. The king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. Now the king of Sodom said to Avram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. That flows better. What doesn't flow is all of a sudden, Avram's on his way to go meet the king of Sodom, and he encounters Melchizedek for no reason, and then immediately starts talking to the king of Sodom again. It looks like the redactor of Genesis, be that Moses or Joshua or any of the other scribes, had a story of Avram meeting Melchizedek. Didn't quite know where to place it, and for some reason dropped it here. This could have been at the beginning of the chapter. This could have been at the end. This could have been in chapter 18. There's no need for it to be here, but this is where it is. Okay? But in terms of like the flow of the Hebrew, it flows better if the story wasn't there. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying throw it away. I'm just saying the text shows that this story is out of place. The Bible isn't chronological as we would understand it. It's not ordered that way. Okay. Neither are the epistles, right? You know, or the gospels for that matter. The epistles are numbered biggest to smallest. Okay. So same with the prophets. The big ones start at the beginning, the small ones are at the end. This is the pattern. So here you have this strange encounter with Melchizedek, king of Shalem, and who brings out bread and wine. And we don't know who Melchizedek is, although the Jewish tradition is it is Shem, because according to the chronology, if you took them literally, then Abraham and Shem actually coincide on the planet together. And so does Noah for the first 48 years of Abraham's life. So that there is a definite connection with God and the knowledge of God, which is latent in the community. And he's a priest of God Most High, El Elyon, not a strange God, not a different God, just his Melchizedek's relationship to God is as he knows him, he is reflected as being the Lord God Most High. And he brings out these elements of bread and wine. Now, for Jewish people in the Levitical system, when you come to have Shabbat or some other festival, you do wine and then bread. In the Christian tradition, when you go have communion, you do bread and wine. Why do they do it that way? Not because they're trying to replace the Levitical system. That's not true. It's because of Melchizedek. It's because of this verse right here, that the pastors and shepherds that we have in our churches are in the order of Melchizedek. They are not replacing Cohens and Levites. They're not replacing the system that is set up by God. They are following a pattern of someone whom Melchizedek, whom Abraham meets. Melchizedek, the king of righteousness and king of Shalem. And yes, people like to always say it's Jerusalem. Maybe it could be. It's just you could have said Jerusalem if you wanted to. We're not 100% sure where Shalem is, but he blesses Avraham, and he blesses Avraham before he blesses God. And this has always been confusing for Jewish sages. And to this day, there's no real good reason. They'll say, we just don't know why this king priest would dare put Avram over and above God. So they struggle with it. But Avraham is blessed by this priest. God is blessed by this priest. And Avraham then gives him a tithe. And this sets up a plethora of theology and questions which we see played out again in the Epistle of Hebrews, and which really helps us to resonate with another high priest who is eternally blessing us as well as God. And that's Jesus, the Yeshua, the Messiah, who Hebrews will use this character of Melchizedek to identify that the priesthood of Yeshua, the priesthood of the Messiah, is better than all other priests. All right. So Abraham is continuing his journey. He has been restored. He has now restored his family. He has been restored. He's an international player. He's met a priest of God. He's been blessed by him. So he is doing actually quite well. He's actually also quite wealthy, and he's beginning to discover who he is along the way. Our next discussion in our next video will be on the covenant that God begins to make with his heroes, and that covenant is still active to this day.